everybody. Welcome to the next episode of Future Focus CXOs. I have a very exciting guest today, Jered Pruitt. He is the Chief Operating Officer for CASL, as they call it. And I'll hand it over to him to introduce himself, and we'll take it from there. Welcome, Jered, to the podcast.
Thank you, Jay. Yes, my name is Jered Pruitt. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for CASL. CASL stands for the Chinese American Service League. It's a lot to swallow, so we always refer to ourselves as CASL, and that's how we're known. We're a multi-service social service organization here in Chicago, but we serve people throughout the entire city, metropolitan area, as well as in other states, and then have some of our technology platforms kind of coast to coast as well. So the focus of our work is, as I said, social services, human services. So we are the second largest Asian American organization in the country, but we're also the most comprehensive social service organization here in Chicago. We have 29 programs that range anywhere from citizenship immigration to early Head Start for childcare, to elder care, to employment, to legal services. We also have a behavioral health program as well, and eventually moving into healthcare component.
I would love to hear, Jered, how did you become involved in CASL and what led to the transition towards becoming a Chief Operating Officer?
Sure. About 9 years ago, I was actually hired as a consultant, brought in to reorganize the organization's philanthropic program and renew their fundraising capacity. So I started out in my career actually in community mental health. I have a master's in clinical psychology and started in community mental health and then ascended up to the executive suite fairly quickly. And then from there, moved to Chicago and focused for about 12 years on leadership in philanthropy. So working with high-level donors, major gifts, running kind of big special events. And so I was brought into CASL as a consultant to help reorganize their development program. And really at that point, the co-founders of the organization were both looking to retire, and they brought me in as a permanent member of kind of the leadership team focused on development work. And then at that stage of kind of retirement, I was then asked to become the Chief Operating Officer, which really touches a bit on my background. It combines clinical, it's programmatic expertise. It combines operational expertise, executive expertise as well, and merged it all together into really one position. And so that's really how I ended up at the organization. And because of that, my role as Chief Operating Officer, for those that may not be as familiar with the nonprofit world, it's very similar to the for-profit, where my focus is on the daily running of the organization, the operations. So I oversee all of our programs, including our think tanks, as well as finance, facilities, in addition to all of our behavioral health programs. And I'm also in charge of kind of the big special projects. So as I mentioned before, we're in the process of working on healthcare, primary health, as our 30th program. And then we recently purchased about 5 1/3 acres here in Chicago, which for Chicago standards is a huge parcel of land, build our second kind of campus location.
Oh, wow. Okay. We are very much familiar with nonprofit. We do a lot of business into that. Salesforce has a nonprofit cloud, as you might know. And I personally also run a chapter for a nonprofit called Akshay Patra. They provide a midday meal programs at a very large scale. So they have provided like 4 billion meals by now in India. What really attracted you towards a nonprofit, building a whole career in nonprofit instead of for-profit, right? It's always a choice people have to make or think about, saying that, do I do this, which is more fulfilling and I'm giving more than I'm taking, right? And how did you make that choice? What attracted you and what got you into this?
You know, it's interesting. My career during college, if you will, so pre-career, if you want to call it, was actually in the medical healthcare industry. And I was one of the first patient care technicians that was in Illinois. So this was years back, of course. And it combined a number of roles that I was working in at that point during college. It helped put me through college. And so I really started out in the medical field. I thought I wanted to be a trauma physician at that point in time. And then working in that for a little while, gravitated more towards the psychology of it, the clinical aspect of humanity. So I've always been from there attracted to the nonprofit world. And my entire career has been spent in the nonprofit career world. And for the couple of times where I've been for-profit, it's been consultant to the nonprofit world.
Okay.
For me, it's really a sense of being able to give back. I look at my life and Growing up in a rural area, a farming community, first person to go to college in my entire family, first person to get a graduate degree in my family. There was always an uphill battle, but I also felt blessed because of the opportunities that I was given or that was presented to me. And of course, I took those opportunities, but they were still presented. And so for me, it's a sense of being able to give back and devote my career on not just helping people, but especially here at CASL with the think tanks, it's helping individuals, helping families, helping households, but it's also trying to move the needle on systemic change and using technology to be able to break down some of those barriers and think about things like disaggregated data, looking at how we can best serve people by using technology to inform our practices.
Let me ask you a little bit about that. We talked a lot about the convergence of technology in healthcare and the nonprofit world. Are you doing things such as leveraging social determinants of health and other things to create and influence the social work that you're doing? And if so, how does that kind of support the initiatives of CASL?
Yeah, absolutely. We are. About 5 years ago, we embarked on a partnership with Salesforce. Like many organizations prior to that, we had different systems in different departments. So you might have a housing department that was using Excel or Access. We had another department that was using another citywide platform, and then another department was using another. And so what happens is you had a huge silo effect. And at that point in time, or even actually today, about 24.3% of the households that we see are receiving multiple services. Back then, there wasn't case coordination. So it's that notion of when you go to receive healthcare, you go to a hospital, let's say that you get injured, you break an ankle, you go to the hospital. It's almost a notion of, well, you can go to the ER, but then you have to go to x-ray, but then radiology doesn't give a copy of the x-ray to the emergency room. So not really sure how to treat you best. So we've developed that platform in healthcare, but not in the nonprofit world. And so we embarked on this adventure about 5 years ago with Salesforce, and we created a CRM, which is not new to the for-profit industry, but isn't widely used in the nonprofit back then. We created that agency-wide. So all of our programs at that point in time, which were 19, we were all on the same platform. Everybody was speaking the same language. Clients were deduplicated. So we made sure that there was one record for one person and it flowed into one household. And that led us into the social determinants of health, more commonly referred to social drivers of health today. And that allowed us to look more into that work. And what led us into that was really trying to not just understand our community, meaning kind of the Chinatown community, but also because we were serving way beyond that, all of Chicagoland, it was also helping us to understand what the community needs were from a data-informed practice and less about what we believed to be true. So a really good case in point. For 40 years, when we had housing, we made an assumption that the community was underbanked. So they lacked checkings and savings account. But when we started running numbers through our own clients and finding out what their stories were and aggregating data together, we discovered that actually wasn't the case. The issue was a lack of credit because it was still a cash-based culture. So we refined our housing education program, our homebuyer education program, to focus less on checkings and savings. Those are still all components, of course, but focus more on how do we build credit. So now we do pre, mid, and post credit checks on our clients over a 9-month period. We do knowledge gain. So we help teach them about credit. We work with them to build their credit. And so typically when a family or an individual comes with a zero credit score or a negligible credit score, over a 9-month period, they end up with about a 720 score, which now you're starting talking into that housing purchase category. And so that is what data allowed us to see. And that's something that we had never really seen before. So it's really broken down assumptions, and now we use data to help prove points, but we also use it to educate our staff. We give them the dashboards and the power to be able to pivot their own work around that. And what we've seen is that our staff have become really engaged with social drivers of health. They've become really engaged with thinking about how else we can support an individual and family when they come to us. So it's less transactional and more transformational. And data is a tool, and Salesforce is a tool, but it's a tool that allows our staff to do their jobs even better.
Wow, okay. I would love to understand, Jered, from you. You've been doing this for a while with CASL. Give us some insights on what kind of impact you are really creating in the society. Give some examples of some programs and how they have really impacted.
Sure. So, for example, one of the things I just cited was around homebuyer education. So today we help about 110 families purchase homes every year. We don't necessarily fund it, but we help them through that process of building credit, teaching them what it means to be a homeowner, helping them through the home purchasing process. So when we look at knowledge gain, you have to understand first before your behaviors can change. So we typically see about a 30-point gain in understanding of our clients on what the home buyer process and what being a homeowner means, among several different kind of domains within that. So then we look at credit score, that's behavior change. So we go from typically 0 to 720. And if somebody comes to us with credit, usually in the 600 range, they're typically around a 750 after 9 months. And then we look at, okay, from that, what percentage of families purchase homes then? About 75% purchase homes. Now, does that mean that the 25% have failed? No. What it helps to do is give us an understanding of, all right, what percentage of families are not building credit, which is rarely the case for us now. But what happens is a lot of those 25%ers are actually choosing to not buy quite yet because of mortgage interest rates. So they've received and they're ready to go, but they're choosing to hold off a bit until rates go down. And then we expect to see a huge kind of onslaught of buyers. But we've still succeeded in preparing them and getting them ready to be able to pull that trigger. So that's an internal component. We've also created a program called Change Insight. So we've partnered with 18 other organizations coast to coast, where we are their data hub now for social drivers of health. So there are 7 organizations here in Chicago, 7 in New York. There's one in Houston, one in LA, one in Seattle, one in Champaign-Urbana, just south of us. And so what we do is we train the staff on how to use empathic inquiry, which is an interviewing style where you really listen more than you talk. It's a therapeutic listening style, but you're still able to gather information on the social drivers of health. They input that in, that feeds up into our platform, and then we're able to disaggregate that data. Now, what's important about that, and what is revolutionary, but it's really not, but it is in its action, is that we disaggregate that data. So the issue is that when you look at how entities publish on the Asian American experience, they tend to lump all Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, Native Hawaiians together into one diaspora. But there are 50 different ethnic populations underneath that. And the needs and the issues are very different. For example, if you were to look at unemployment rate, and unemployment rate now for Asian Americans is less than 3%. But when you break it down by community, you're going to see that the Filipino community has a much, much higher rate. The Bhutanese, the Hmong population, huge unemployment rate. But it's not reflected in the numbers because they're a smaller subset of the population. So when elected leaders want to make decisions or policymakers want to make decisions, they go off of Asian American data, which skew and hurts a lot of the populations within that. So we give data out there, we collect it, we disaggregate it, we de-identify it, of course, we publish on that. We give the data back to the organizations for their organization, their community, and their region, so they have a better understanding, so they can advocate for their needs with elected leaders using real time and data with validity and reliability that's broken down by the ethnic communities. And so now they have power to their voice because they have more than just being able to offer anecdotal stories. They can actually talk about the needs in their community and the struggles that they're facing with confidence and certainty.
Oh, that is a huge impact you are making, actually.
One of the things that stands out to me is your physician psychology background, working towards the empathic inquiry, leading towards gathering the correct amount of data that you can then de-aggregate. I would love to know, how did you move? What was that pivotal moment where you realized technology was going to get alongside your psychology and leadership skills that was going to help you do what you needed to do to get this kind of data? Was there a particular moment or a particular event in your career that kind of said, okay, going in the path of data is going to help me be able to advance this human communication problem that we have?
Yeah, I think there's a series of it, and it's not necessarily like an aha moment. It's been building, but there are sub moments in there. For example, when we adopted our 3-year strategic plan 3 years ago, we're in the process of doing a new, we actually use the platform to tell us the data, give us the data for our board to make strategic decisions about the movement of the organization. So one of those was looking at how we serve people and how can we do so in a comprehensive manner? Because when we receive new clients, when people come in for services, they typically have a viewpoint of, I need this one thing. I'm behind on my gas bill, so I need energy assistance. And so they come in with that notion of, I'm behind on my gas bill and that's all I need. And so what data allows us to do is start asking the question of, how else can we help? So when you use that model of kind of empathic inquiry and you're listening more than you're talking, you start to input the data components in there. What happens is that the system then tells where some of the areas of concerns are based off of scoring. And then that intake worker could then do an additional referral or have that conversation with the client saying, hey, you know what, you're behind on your energy bill, but we see that you were also here last year for the same thing and the year before. How can we help to change this trajectory? And maybe it's a senior citizen to where they're on limited income. So that's a different conversation. But maybe it's a single mom of 3 kids. And so that allows us to engage differently and say, look, we know you're coming for this, but how else can we help? The other thing is that data has allowed us to grow from 19 programs to 29 in 3 years. Our budget has gone from about 13 million to now over 30 million. And our staffing is around 638 people. And that's gone up by about 150 staff. And the power in this is that this has also given philanthropic leaders the data they need to make decisions. And so when they come to CASL and want to engage us around a donation or a commitment, they have faith and they have certainty in our data and in our numbers, because we can present that literally in real time with a push of a button. And so we've had conversations with foundations and corporate foundations where they've asked about programs, and I've brought my laptop, I've brought in my hotspot on my cell phone, and I say, all right, let's log into the platform. What would you like to see within your kind of your zone that you fund? Show them in real time. And what we found is that the conversation is no longer about grant reports and grant deliverables. It's more about trust-based philanthropy and having a conversation about how we together can actually make greater change, because the numbers are there, the data's there, our impact is there. And it doesn't mean that we achieve all the time, but what it does mean is that when we're not achieving a specific goal, the data does say to us, hey, how do we change? It says to our staff, how do we pivot around this issue? So we don't have to wait for a crisis to be created. We know the trending before it actually becomes an issue.
I want to move it a little to more of the personal side of things. And given that you've really built into your comfort with technology and really learning how to lean into that, how do you feel? What would you give another person who feels like they're on that trajectory, feels like they want to move in towards a C-suite? What sort of moments helped you personally make decisions that led towards you being able to do this well and feel that this is really in line with what you want to be doing for most of your career?
I think that a couple of things that I tell people that, especially want to get into kind of nonprofit leadership or even the nonprofit world, what I would say is it's not easy work. The notion of people thinking that nonprofit is a 9 to 5, you come in and talk to clients and you help them. It's not that simple. Actually, what I would say is that the nonprofit world, and I've been in this for 25 years now, over the past 5 to 10 years, has become incredibly complex. There's a lot more governance. There's a lot more compliance, especially when you're running as many programs as we run. It's almost a level of kind of doing healthcare without doing healthcare. And so what I would say to somebody who's interested in becoming a leader in nonprofit is a couple of things. Make sure that you are well-rounded, especially in a chief operating officer role. You've got to know a lot about everything. The other thing is that making sure that you, as a leader, coach and empower your team and also look at accountability within that scope. So one of the things that is critical is that you have to be willing to look in a mirror every day at your own leadership. So one of the pivotal points for me personally in my career was I was lucky enough to have an executive coach last year, and the executive coach really helped hold that mirror up to me. And as we've grown as an organization, it's required me to pivot as a COO. My hands were in everything at all levels. And I was that trusted source where everybody just said, Jered's got the answer. Let's go see Jered. But as we grew, that just was no longer an option anymore. And so working with a coach, she helped me to really pivot around that and learn how to trust my team, hold accountable, make sure that my role as a leader was becoming more of a coach, a mentor, and somebody who could inspire versus somebody who was actually doing the day-to-day. And so what I say to viewers that are looking to ascend in this trajectory is you have to be willing to adapt. You have to be willing to change in order to survive, but also in order to grow as a professional and grow as an individual. Now, part of that is I put my clinical hat on as well, but you have to be willing to accept criticism. You have to take it in the spirit that it was given or intended to be, and you have to be able to think about that and pivot around that.
Wow, great advice. I think you guys are using a lot of data and it's just creating a significant impact. The question really I have is, as we see, AI is rapidly being adopted, right? And it's also rapidly being growing, right? With so many jargons into generative AI to conversational AI and things that people are waiting into. The question to is how are you thinking about AI? What do you see as a future, right? And how does it really apply to nonprofits as a third part?
Yeah, it's interesting. Salesforce just did their world tour Chicago last week that I was at, and it was all about generative AI and language learning models and the latest kind of chat GPT models around that. And the way that I look at this, especially from the human services, social services perspective, is I definitely see AI assisting on more of the tech side of things around visualizations and making those visualizations easier for staff to be able to make decisions based off of their clients. I cannot see the future yet for generative AI or language learning models around directly helping clients, because you still have to have that kind of human-centered human interface component, that empathic inquiry. But I do see the power in having AI help to generate models and generate understanding of what clients' areas of needs are, but also communities' areas of needs are. I think there's a lot of power in that component.
The idea that your AI is good at creating an understanding of the multiple cultures within that CASL serves, but at the same time, it's not going to be effective at crossing the bridge to actually communicating in the way those cultures need to be communicated with. And so what you're doing is gathering enough macro data to visualize it in such a way to empower the person who's connecting to the community.
Yeah, and I think that's what our trajectory has been from the start. But as technology advances, that rudimentariness of it can continue to grow and better assist the caseworkers and the therapists and the counselors, and make technology a little bit less clunky and more intuitive. And so it helps them to be able to make decisions a bit faster, a bit cleaner, but it's not going to really take the place of that human interface, that empathic person that can be in front saying, how can I help you? We've all had the experience where if you're on a website and you have an option to call somebody or chat with the chat box, I don't know about all the listeners, but typically me, I'm going to pick up the phone and want to talk to an actual person, because there's only so far a chat bot can get you. Now, we might move to, as a society, to a point where it is as effective, but when you're talking about what is core to the nonprofit community and social services, it's about people, it's about humans, and it's about how we connect with them and how we can help them as best we can. And the tool provides a better experience for us to be able to help them.
Excellent. And I think from the healthcare perspective, one of the things that Jay and I worked on around that was using Health Cloud and Salesforce to build towards the construct of more interventionary medicine, seeing when someone is heading towards a medical event that could be financially devastating, it could be life-threatening, it could be all of the things, right? And so the idea that you can add some sort of macro data on top of that human interaction leveraged by technology, so that the social worker, caseworker can be aware of some critical concerns that one particular individual or family has as opposed to someone else, to both. Because I think one of the biggest things I see is that one medical event can destroy all the other financial and life goals. And so how do you both protect and guide that. Because if you teach me how to have good credit, that's great. But then $100,000 ER visit changes everything. What do you see from a perspective of a nonprofit's, the energy, like when you're trying to balance the philanthropy, gathering money where everybody's thinking about how can I help? I'm sure AI is a common conversation that pops up, like how can we build into getting on this bandwagon, because that's where a lot of the money for other investments are going. But at the same time, really stay focused and targeted towards doing the real work that's changing lives that CASL does really well. So how do you feel that conversation is shifting because of this impact of generative AI?
I think there definitely is more conversation and more interest in kind of the work we do with our think tanks, especially around our Center for Social Impact, and using data to help make decisions, and using macro data, especially to be able to transform organizations and transform communities. There's a pretty large growing interest in that area. I think in terms of kind of the healthcare component, we're a partner in what we call the Southside Health Equity Collaborative, which is a Medicaid transformation grant. There's 6 entities, and there's 1 hospital and 5 federally qualified health centers and us. And we're the patient navigation hub for that 5-year project, as well as the data hub. And because we have so many comprehensive social drivers of health, kind of non-health programs, where that social service aspect for all of these other partners. And as such, we're in the process of building out that model that uses data lakes that can connect and move data from all of the EMRs into a data lake, which then moves into our Salesforce platform, so we can coordinate care among all of the providers in this collaborative that are part of the South Side of Chicago. And so it's taking that notion and expanding it to other organizations in a more comprehensive way. It's not easy, though, especially when you're talking about integrating with EMR health records. No, people engage me around talking about how we've been able to transcend over the past 5 years. I always tell people when they're interested in doing this for their own organizations, I say to them, it's 20% technology and 80% workplace culture. Because you can have the most amazing technology in place, but if your staff aren't engaged to use it, they're never going to turn it on. And we see that kind of happen time and time again, where organizations that want to come talk to us, they bring their CEO, they bring their chief information officer. And I always ask, where's your chief program officer? Where's your director of programs? Because it's about that 80%. And if it's just about technology, it's never going to get off the ground.
Love it. I think that's a great way to understand that, as the culture will typically override any technological enhancements that you do if they're just not willing to use it. We know adoption, you can build the best CRM, and if nobody uses it, it's useless.
We put a lot of effort on the front end when we built this out around building ambassadors, making sure we're using Sandbox for people to play around in the platform. The ambassadors worked with the architects of the platform directly to let them know what they needed in it, but also what they could potentially also have in it as well. And so when we rolled it out, at that point in time, it was 19 programs. Today we have 29. We have a 98% daily utilization rate. And that focuses on the amount of effort we put into that 80% workplace culture. It's from everything where the word Salesforce is used every day at our organization by even our direct care staff. It's in everybody's job description. We built out the Center for Social Impact that not only does external-based kind of macro data with change in sight, but we have 4 certified Salesforce techs on staff. And so they help support the infrastructure, but they all speak program language as well, meaning social service language. And so we always made sure that our platform is not housed in IT. Actually, IT doesn't have login credentials to it. Their job is to keep the infrastructure there, the laptops, the hardware, the software. Our Center for Social Impact is our team that runs Salesforce, but they're also program. They can speak that human program language and be able to much more easily connect the dots. So those are just some of those components we put in place, which was completely different than the traditional model of moving a platform, an IT platform, under IT. It's turning it on its head and saying, look, this isn't about the tool, it's about the people, and it's a tool for the people. So how do we look at things a bit differently around this?
I have one last question on that, because this is really my jam. This is my kind of stuff. But what did it take to get your executive team on board with putting the people first when it came to making technology enhancements?
I think it really started with our board of directors and going to them, because at that point in time for us was a large investment for our organization. It was also a new type of investment. Typically, when you talk about capital or CapEx, you're thinking about buying more vans to transport or putting up a new building. Technology was just new at that point. And a lot of the discussion was based off the vision, is saying, look, this is the direction that philanthropy is going. There is the greatest transfer of wealth occurring in this nation in its history. And the new generation of wealth is data informed. They're less focused on brand loyalty like their fathers and mothers were. They're more focused on impact. They want to make sure that their investment is making an impact. And you can't really prove that without data. Yes, you can give a story of one particular client, but if they're investing $1 million, they want to see what the larger impact is. And so having that conversation with the board to say, look, this is where philanthropy is going. And that's where I put on my fundraising philanthropic hat on, which is why, again, it's really important as an executive leader to be well-rounded and dive into all facets and all areas. So it was really talking to the board and talking to them about where and what the future looked like for data-informed organizations and what the future looked like for non-data informed organizations. And I also talked to them about being able to serve the community better. So rather than having somebody come in for energy assistance once a year, every fall, when their gas bill goes up, being able to have that conversation with them and say, look, we've seen you now for 3 years in a row. How else can we help you? How can we be your support network? Maybe you have needs in your family as well that aren't here today, but we can bring them in too and talk about how can we help the whole household. So it was really a couple points. It was where we were going as an industry and as a society, but it was also how can we do better? How can we improve our impact? One of the questions I had asked and I said to the board is I said, 5 years ago, if somebody came to me, a donor came to me and said, are you having an impact? I could have said, yes, of course. We're serving lots of people. We see it every day. But if they were to say, prove it, I would have struggled to be able to prove it. I could throw stories out, but if they would have said, prove it with numbers, I would have had a difficult time being able to do that. Today, I can push a button and show them in real time. So I think it was the executive leadership, the board, they bought in, a little nervous at that time with the investment. Today, I will tell you that the board, there's not a board meeting that goes by that you don't hear the word Salesforce. And even the people who were detractors or just weren't really sure about this, they're on board. And now it's just it's a foundation of who we are as an organization. Took some time, but even the detractors back then are huge supporters now of it. And because of that, we've been able to help other communities as well, not just our own backyard.
All right. I am out of questions. This was a fantastic conversation. Thank you, Jered, for all that you're doing and all your insights today. I think this is critical information to understand how to build nonprofit in a data center world. And I'm just thrilled that you leveraged all of your skills to get to the point where you could create this environment that puts both the human and the technology together. That's a rare thing, and it's been an honor having a conversation with you.
I also want to thank you all for having me on as your guest.
No worries. Thank you.